What's up, Internet? Kevin here. Now, March just ended, so I've got 5 more kick-ass iOS games for you guys to check out. This month's list contains a couple simple titles, with a few getting a little more complex, jumping into puzzles, word games, or just nostalgia fuel. But before we get to any of those, we're going to start with one of the simple titles, Blokshot Revolution. Blokshot is by far the simplest game on this month's list. It's a straightforward arcade design where all you're really trying to do is get the highest score possible by shooting a bunch of blocks before they hit the bottom of the screen, causing a game over. It's not quite that easy though, because the game isn't as simple as just aiming at a block and firing. Instead, the whole thing is based around centripetal force. You have to hold your finger on the screen to make your laser spin around, and you release to have it fire out in whatever direction it was currently spinning towards. Now, the game does help you out a little bit as you get better at it, because once you start getting combos, you'll get power-ups, things like having a triple shot or chaining from one block to the next. It's definitely frustrating to try picking up at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's a really great game to try and compete with your friends over getting high scores. Not to mention, it has great visuals and a solid soundtrack. The game is initially free to play, but it does have pop-up ads, so if those bother you, you can remove them for the fee of $1.99. Now, next up is another game that's initially free to play, but you can pay to remove ads. It's one of the weirdest games to come out this past month, and really one of the weirdest games I've ever put on one of these lists before, and that's Silly Sausage. Now, initially this game looks like it might just be a Snake clone, you know, something where you're not supposed to touch the walls or yourself, but that's not the case at all. Touching walls is actually a very smart thing to do, because while the earlier parts of the game may seem a little simple, just navigating your way from point A to point B, it starts to get a lot more difficult really quickly once the game starts adding a lot more obstacles. Things like saw blades, lasers you have to time yourself jumping through, or even buttons you can press that make blocks disappear or reappear, which can work to your advantage. To be perfectly honest, initially I didn't think much of this game, but I kept pushing through it a little bit because the reviews looked so good, and I don't regret doing that at all. It shapes up to be a really fun puzzle-style game. The only complaint I really have is that it is very ad heavy. Even if you remove the ads for $1.99, the game still has ads you can watch in order to create checkpoints. Now, you can also make checkpoints by using gems you find while traveling through all the different levels, but there never seems to be quite enough gems for every single checkpoint. So if you want to have a checkpoint every time you can get one, well, you're gonna have to watch some ads at one point or another. Third up is Lettercraft. Now, this is very similar to a game I put on one of my other past lists for top 5, which was all centered around trying to make words as quickly as you could before some of them blew up and got destroyed. Well, this takes a similar approach where it's a Scrabble-style board, and if you take too long, letters start to disappear, but that doesn't start the game over. What makes the game end is if you run out of word options. So the whole idea is to just constantly make words as fast as you can while trying to vary which blocks you use so you have as many options as you can as long as possible. Now, the game does have a couple different modes to try. There is just a straight up endless mode. There's also a campaign mode where each level has different restrictions, things like you have to only make words that have the letter A in it, so on and so forth. And it also features a multiplayer option as well. Now, while the game is initially free to download, if you want to play through the entire campaign, you do end up having to spend $2.99, but it's completely worth it. Now, fourth on the list is the only game this month that I put down that does require you to pay up front, and that's Card Crawl. Card Crawl is this really interesting fusion of a sort of solitaire approach to card game design, but by adding in RPG elements. The idea is you get dealt a number of cards, and you have to make use of them either by equipping them, picking them up, or using items to destroy enemies. The initial goal is simple enough that all you need to do is get through the deck, but after that, if you really want to challenge yourself, you want to start trying to get high scores, which forces you to sell items to make higher gold profits, which counts as a high score, but also means you're going to end up winning by the skin of your teeth, and it can get really dangerous. The game does offer a couple different game modes. You can just play the regular mode where you have a mixture of different weapon, shield, and power-up cards, but there's constructed deck mode as well, where you can unlock different special cards and pick 5 of your favorites to put in the deck, some of which are unlocked by just winning so many rounds, others you have to save up your coins in order to purchase. This game is a fantastic time killer for only $2, and if you're a fan of just killing time with solo card games, this one's a great option to pick up. Now, last up on this month's list is a style I don't really do too much on these top 5 lists, and that's Final Fantasy Recordkeeper, a game that is initially free to play, but does have a lot of in-app purchases to get gems to unlock better equipment sooner. The thing is, it's really not all that necessary. Now, admittedly, a large part of the fun for this game comes from whether or not you're a fan of the Final Fantasy series, and if you are, this thing is one gigantic, really fun nostalgia trip. The entire idea is that you revisit a bunch of the major battles across the entire series, but not only do you get to revisit those battles, but as you complete them, you start to unlock more characters that you can add in and out of your party, coming from games across the entire series. And which characters you use aren't just purely cosmetic, they all have their own special abilities. You can craft different items that some of them are restricted to using, different special attacks, so you can really make an interesting party formed out of some of your favorites, and it's going to actually show beyond just being purely cosmetic. Now, as I said earlier, the game does have in-app purchases where you can buy gems to get special weapons and things like that, but all those really do is make the game infinitely easier so you can beat it even faster. They're not really all that necessary. If you take your time going through each level, you'll always be just powerful enough to handle things, which I really appreciate. The game does also use that really annoying power timer thing where every battle uses up so much power and you have to wait for some of it to recharge over real time, but fights take long enough to where it really never actually becomes an issue. If you're a fan of Final Fantasy, then this game is an absolute must-grab, just for the nostalgia alone. It's absolutely free to try out, definitely worth looking into. Well, there you guys have it, my favorite iOS games of March 2015. Now, there were a lot of games this month, even more so than usual, where I really wrestled with which ones I wanted to put on this list, so I know there's a lot out there that you guys probably loved that you didn't see listed, so let me know in the comments what games you loved that came out this past month. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later with more great content.